Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian. In response to President Trump's April 2018 update to the U.S. conventional arms transfer policy, the Aerospace Industries Association last week submitted recommendations to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to improve America's security cooperation with its allies and partners worldwide. We attended a May 31 press conference and then spoke with Remy Nathan, AIA's Vice President for International Affairs, and his deputy, Dak Hardwick, to discuss AIA's proposals.
With the release of the National Security Presidential Memorandum 10 back in April, the CEOs that make up AIA's leadership saw the opportunity that the announcement represented in getting senior level attention that's long been needed on this issue of security cooperation enterprise reform. So there was always this plan to make sure that as AIA participated in the reform proposal development process that we're currently in the middle of, that we would make sure that we would have the dialogue not just at the level of the task force or the bureaucracy, but also at the most senior levels of the administration. When you take the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and then NSPM 10 all together, you certainly have the elements that allow you to say from a strategy basis what matters to the United States in terms of security cooperation. When we say that we're looking for a national security cooperation strategy, we're not looking for another strategy document. Rather, we're looking for the plan that will allow you to implement, to execute those three documents on a very specific transactional basis. So in other words, what are the transactions, what are the capabilities that we want our allies and partners to have that are in the pipeline, as well as looking forward in the more medium to long term that we want them to have, that maximize U.S. foreign policy, national security, and economic interests. From an industry perspective, and it's reflected in the letter that we sent to Secretary Pompeo, we see the competition for influence, for partnership with allies, to be zero-sum, time-sensitive, and having an enduring impact. Therefore, whenever the U.S. is trying to offer a solution to an ally and partner, and there's an alternative in place, whether that's something from Europe or alternatively from an adversary, we have to make a conscious effort to do everything we can, I think, as a Team USA, to try to make sure that the U.S. solution is the one that ultimately is selected. So in that context, having a national security cooperation strategy, having a plan, having guidance that allows you to say that these are the transactions that we ought to really be paying attention to, and making sure that we remove whatever obstacles may be in the way of getting to the right answer, whether that's yes or no, and if it's a no, are there ways to ameliorate the no through engagement, training, diplomacy, capacity building, what have you. We need to have that conscious, forward-looking approach to security cooperation as a competitive endeavor. When you look at the reforms that we're trying to pursue, we're trying to maximize transparency to allow for better planning and a more thoughtful approach, and we're trying to emphasize efficiency because speed matters, right? And in that vein, it matters on a couple of different levels. On a foreign policy basis, as you just mentioned, when the ally or partner has to wait for an answer, right? There can be frustrations. There can be doubt that's introduced about how the country fits in with U.S. posture overseas, and that's problematic. From a operational perspective, it takes time for countries to integrate, to absorb the capacity that we're trying to provide to them. And as well, if we don't have the right plan in place, we may find ourselves with perhaps the right platform there, but not necessarily the right sustainment or the right training. So that's another element of the time process that needs to be taken into consideration. And then finally, from an industry perspective, from an economic perspective, we in industry need to have the transparency to allow us to make the right business capture and the right technology development decisions so that we are there in place with the right answer for the ally and partner when they come forward and say that they're looking for a specific capability, or the U.S. is successful in convincing them to try to pursue that capability. So certainly the numbers reflect that the interagency process of review and approval of defense exports is very active. Year after year, we're looking at record numbers, which reflect the high demand signal that U.S. capabilities have from our allies and partners. Despite those record numbers, we would contend that the system itself could operate more efficiently, could reach the right answer in a more timely fashion. Part one of that, of course, is the need for a plan, the strategy that we talked about. Part two of it is to try to make sure that there's the right system in place to monitor and drive the transactions through the review process in a timely fashion. There's no one agency or entity within the system that ultimately has the ownership of the time frame in which a decision is meant to is arrived at. And so while we're not very prescriptive in what the accountability mechanism is supposed to be, I think there are two criteria that we would say it would need to have. One is that would need to be across the interagency, because again, there's any number of places where a delay could result in a negative result in terms of our efforts to try to maximize the benefits to the U.S. And then the other piece of it is that it's got to be senior, right? Because since the decision-making process can go up and down the decision chain within a given department or agency, you need to have enough of a vantage point to be able to see all aspects of the review process and identify where things are potentially delayed, but also to be in a position to develop new processes, new policies, when the delay in question is not episodic, but it's rather systemic. And ultimately, if you take those two recommendations that we have to offer, the plan and the accountability mechanism, even if the administration confirms its desire to act on just those two, we are firmly confident that the administration will find that the rest of the recommendations we've arrived at are necessary, because those are the obstacles that we have found oftentimes on a systemic basis create delay in arriving at the right decision in a timely fashion.
The comprehensive plan that we have put together for the National Security Cooperation Strategy, and in response to the National Security Presidential Memorandum 10 on the Conventional Arms Transfer Policy, certainly is the work of many months of the industry coming together and talking about a variety of different things that we focus on here on a daily basis, whether it's technology transfer, or whether it's licensing, or whether it's non-program of record. And so in 7 major areas, we really have focused on some real change that we think would be very good for the industry, but also good for the overall national security of the United States. So first of all, our companies focus very much on what we call non-program of record. And those particular items are where you have items that are in the U.S. inventory, but maybe one of the customers wants to modify one of those items, they immediately become a non-program of record. And that requires the companies to seek additional approvals through the U.S. government in order to get it through the system. When you do that, unfortunately, it can take a little longer. And the customers are asking for the equipment. U.S. companies are trying to move through the process as much as they can. And so we have put together some common sense reforms that we think would help get through that process. On the technology transfer side, we see that the commercial side of overall aerospace and defense really is driving the technology of the day. And we see certain countries coming to light very quickly on some real technology-related issues. And we think that technology transfer can be streamlined, it can be right-sized. We can put forward some common sense solutions in order to meet not only the technology transfer requirements of other countries, but also maintain the technology security of the United States so we don't put our warfighters at risk. So we've put some real common sense items on the table for the U.S. government to consider. We put together 21 pages of recommendations for the U.S. government. We think there are some great opportunities there for reform. It is the most comprehensive set of reforms that we've put forward probably in the last decade, and looking forward to the response from the U.S. government in order to make some real change. Offset's obviously a very complicated part of the aerospace and defense business, but also it's necessary in order to stay competitive in the global market space. So it's important to remember that offsets are requirements of the foreign customer. So U.S. companies have to abide by certain offset regulations put forward by the foreign customer. And so what we're seeing is increasingly complicated offset requirements, not only in work share, in joint ventures, but also in technology transfer, because those particular countries that are focused on offsets and building up their own industrial capabilities, they want to make sure that they have industrial participation that benefits their workers. Our companies have gone to the United States government and have indicated that it is becoming increasingly complicated. It's complicated on the DCS side, on the direct commercial sales side, but also on the foreign military sales side. We have to remember that offsets are in fact requirements that we have to abide by. But at the same time, in order for us to stay competitive, we have to put these offsets programs forward as requirements of the foreign partner. It's something that our U.S. government colleagues have to be very mindful of. A good example recently is the work that we have done with the Republic of Korea on offsets. So Korea has been particularly challenging for the aerospace and defense business. The South Korean government asked for an opportunity to have offsets to be free. And because offsets are a requirement of the foreign government, we cannot have free offsets. There is no such thing as a free offset. So we have to have an opportunity to recoup some of those costs. And as a result of some of the work that we did with the U.S. government, we feel like that we got the relationship between the United States government and the foreign and the South Koreans to a point where we could go forward with some foreign military sales and direct commercial sales. But that work has taken at least 2 years. And what we see in the global offsets market is that offsets customers do tend to talk to each other, so we want to make sure that we are leveling the playing field and we are right-sizing the offset requirements across the globe for U.S. companies to compete.
So within the ITAR, there is the basis for companies to seek a program license, which in essence is an attempt to try to clarify and get approval in advance for specific companies to exchange specific technologies for a specific project. And avoid having to go on a transaction-by-transaction basis for approval to the U.S. government in exchanging these technologies. The challenge with the existing formula or model of the program license is that it requires whichever company initially applies for the program license to absorb all of the liability for any transactional mistake, any violation that may occur within the overall program license, and that's not really a workable proposition. We need to have a new modified way forward on program licensing that recognizes that certain programs increasingly are global in nature and require a significant amount of cross-border, country-to-country transactions in the development, production, and sustainment phase of a given system. And so understanding that that is going to become more common, not less, we need to find a way to move away from transaction-by-transaction licensing and have smarter caseload management models. So in our mind, revamping the program licensing model so that it is fair, equitable, easy to use, and does not require as much paperwork as the transaction-by-transaction model is the ultimate goal of what we're asking for.
Under direct commercial sales, there are some items that advance so far in the commercial space that frankly they don't need to be part of the foreign military sales system anymore. One of the things that we might recommend is if the U.S. government is going to continue to focus on what we call the total package approach, which includes sustainment and training, then that can also be part of a direct commercial sale. There's no reason why it necessarily has to be part of the foreign military sales system. We want to make sure that those items that are part of the foreign military sales system are used exclusively for foreign militaries. Any items that can go beyond foreign militaries, whether they are gendarmerie or whether they are police forces or whether they are part of any other part of a foreign government apparatus, those items can go direct commercial. And if those items can be freely bought on the commercial market, then there's no reason why they need to be part of the FMS system. So obviously the largest growth area for a lot of aerospace and defense companies is Category 1 unmanned systems. We're seeing tremendous change in that particular field, really driven by the commercial market and ensuring that we have the right parameters for either speed and the amount of payload that's being carried by those particular items is something that we want to make sure that we right-size. Technology is operating faster than we have ever imagined. What I'd like to tell people is that it has never been this fast and it will never be this slow again in terms of technology development and UAS development. And so some of the areas for UAS we think are ripe for reform. We look forward to a continuous conversation with the U.S. government because the technology is in fact changing daily. It's one of those areas where we're going to have to stay in close coordination not only with our government colleagues but also our foreign partners who are asking for this capability because they see not only defense opportunities for unmanned systems but also commercial and civil opportunities. And we want to make sure that we give them the very best that we can, obviously obviously made by U.S. workers here in the United States. At the beginning of the year, we pulled together our members, both our large integrators, but also our small and medium-sized companies, to talk about some of the issues that they were running into. And out of those particular conversations, we found that there were very wide opinions about what we needed to focus on, and over the course of about 4 or 5 months, we were able to gain consensus among the entire aerospace and defense industry. In addition, we've also had outside groups that have had the opportunity to review these recommendations and have essentially endorsed those recommendations. And so it was painstaking work, going line by line, literally through some regulations to identify the areas of reform that we wanted to focus on. But at the same time, each company is coming to the table with very different focus, very different opportunities for their own particular business, but came together as an industry, and over the course of about 5 months came to the final conclusion, which was terrific. I think the reaction so far has been very positive. Remember, the aerospace and defense industry, especially when you're dealing with foreign military sales and transfer of defense material overseas, it's one of the most highly regulated industries in the United States. And so in order to make some real change and real progress, even small changes are very important. So what you see in the document that we put forward is very small, very detailed-oriented changes that we know that will make a big impact, even to the point of making some real changes in specific recommendations and specific titles within U.S. regulation. And that's very important for this particular industry. We want to make sure that we focus on a national security cooperation strategy and have some enterprise accountability. In the same breath, we have to also make sure that we are making some very small changes, because those small changes have big impacts.
We're hoping for an opportunity to engage in further dialogue with the administration on our proposals. We don't expect that they're going to take everything that we've proposed as a given. We are, of course, open to understanding what their concerns are, to refine our asks so that they are more in line with perhaps what is most reasonable or possible with the resources, the bandwidth, the challenges that they have to work with. But ultimately, we're also expecting this process to continue. We don't want to see a process that begins and ends with a short-term action plan coming out of this review process, because the issue is too important and it's too complex to just be managed on a one-off basis. What we need is sustained and senior engagement on the way forward for security cooperation, and that is certainly the underpinning behind why we felt it was important to raise this issue to the level of Secretary Pompeo and ensure that he understands that we are in it for the long haul, and we hope that he will be as well. Well, we've been on the record registering our concern about the impact that tariffs have on aerospace trade. Certainly, the American industry benefits considerably from that trade. We have concerns about the impact of tariffs on our global supply chain, as well as the potential for retaliation that may exist. Ultimately, we trust that all parties involved in these discussions will arrive at the consensus solution that addresses these concerns about overcapacity in the marketplace for aluminum and steel, but ultimately also maximizes the benefits that accrue not just to the United States, but also those same allies and partners when there is free and fair trade in aerospace.